When I think back to that evening, the memory still stings. I had spent the afternoon in my little kitchen, carefully preparing the apple pie that used to be my son's favorite. I made it the same way I always had, cinnamon just right, the crust golden and flaky. I even brought it over in the old pie tin Harold and I bought when we were first married. It was my way of showing love, of staying connected to family traditions. The house was full of laughter when I arrived, but none of it seemed to include me. Melissa was the picture of perfection, gliding around in her elegant dress and sparkling jewelry, her hair pinned neatly. I had chosen a simple navy dress that had been hanging in my closet for years. It wasn't fashionable, but it was clean and modest, and I thought it would do. As I stepped in, I could already feel the difference between her world and mine. At the table, I set the pie down, hoping it might bring a smile. Instead, Melissa barely glanced at it, her manicured fingers brushing past as if it were an afterthought. She made a comment, light on the surface but sharp enough to cut something about how old-fashioned desserts didn't really suit modern tastes anymore. Everyone chuckled politely, except me. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, heat rising in my cheeks, pretending it didn't matter. Inside, though, I felt small. I remembered the nights I stayed up sewing my son's school costumes, the mornings I woke at dawn to make his favorite pancakes before practice. The years of sacrifice I thought would mean something. Now it seemed those years had been erased, replaced with a shallow kind of sophistication that left no room for me. As the meal went on, I realized no one asked about me, about my day, or even about the pie cooling on the counter. I was a presence in the room, but not a participant. Melissa laughed. My son nodded along, and I sat quietly, feeling more invisible with every passing minute. When I finally excused myself and walked out into the cool night air, I understood something I had been trying to deny. I wasn't just a guest in their home. I was an outsider, and the ache of that truth followed me all the way back to my empty house. What I didn't know then was that the humiliation at that dinner table was only the beginning. Soon, I would learn just how far Melissa was willing to go. It started with what seemed like such a small request. My son told me it would be easier for the family if Melissa had access to my credit card just in case of emergencies, or if something came up while he was at work. He said it with that same gentle tone he had used as a boy whenever he wanted something, and I found myself nodding before I'd truly thought it through. I told myself it was practical, that it would make things smoother for them, and in that moment, it felt like I was doing something kind for my family. At first, the charges that showed up were harmless enough. A trip to the pharmacy, groceries from the market, school supplies for my grandson, things any family would need, things I would have gladly helped with anyway. Seeing those small expenses reassured me. I remember thinking, this is fine. I'm helping them get by, and it's not costing me more than I can handle. But over time, I started noticing changes. The receipts were different no longer for crayons and milk, but for spa treatments and boutique shopping. Fine dining bills from restaurants I had never heard of appeared on the statement. I caught myself staring at the numbers, my stomach tightening. $100 here, $300 there, then larger amounts that made my breath catch. Each month, I tried to explain it away, Maybe Melissa needed a break. Maybe it was a special occasion. Maybe they'd pay me back soon. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to hold on to the picture of a family that still cared for one another, even if deep down, unease was gnawing at me. There were nights when I sat at my kitchen table with the bill in my hands, whispering to myself that it wasn't worth a fight. My son seemed so sure it was all fine, and Melissa carried herself as though nothing was wrong. Part of me felt guilty even questioning it. After all, wasn't I supposed to be the one supporting them? Wasn't that what mothers did? And yet, another part of me couldn't shake the dread. The pattern was shifting, the spending growing bolder, and the silence between us heavier. I told myself not to worry, but in my heart, I knew I was standing at the edge of something I didn't yet understand. I didn't realize then that these small compromises were only the beginning. What came next would shake me in ways I never imagined. The day it all came crashing down began like any other. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping lukewarm coffee, when I opened the latest credit card statement. My eyes scanned the page, expecting the usual: a few groceries, maybe a pharmacy run. But the numbers blurred as I saw the total. Over $7,000. My heart sank. I thought at first it had to be a mistake, that maybe I'd been sent someone else's bill. But as I went line by line, there it was in black and white: designer boutiques, spa packages, luxury dining, even charges from a resort I had never set foot in. I remember gripping the paper so tightly that it crumpled in my hand. My first instinct was disbelief. My second was to call my son and Melissa, to tell them something was terribly wrong. But when I finally spoke to Melissa about it, her response left me speechless. She brushed it off with a practiced smile, telling me I must have misread, that maybe I was forgetting what I had agreed to. She said it so smoothly, as though she truly believed it herself. For a moment, I questioned my own memory. Had I overlooked something? Was I really slipping the way she implied? Those doubts haunted me for days. I found myself staring at the refrigerator, trying to recall if I had eaten breakfast. I caught myself second-guessing whether I had paid the water bill. Every little lapse in memory became fuel for her suggestion that I was confused, incapable of handling my own affairs. And that fear, the fear of losing my mind, cut deeper than the debt itself. But somewhere inside, a small voice urged me not to accept her version of reality. I pulled out old statements, compared charges, and began highlighting what didn't belong. The pattern was undeniable. These weren't forgetful mistakes. They were deliberate choices, written all over my balance sheet. My hands shook as I dug deeper, calling the bank for clarification. That's when the truth came out in a flood I wasn't prepared for. Melissa hadn't just been using my card. She had opened new accounts under my name, lines of credit I never authorized, debt piling up on signatures that weren't mine. The representative on the phone confirmed details that made my stomach churn. Dates, amounts, accounts I had never touched, all tied to me because of her. I sat there in stunned silence. The phone pressed to my ear long after the call had ended. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't carelessness. It was theft, calculated and cruel. The woman who sat across from me at dinner tables, who smiled while pouring wine, had been dismantling my life piece by piece behind my back. In that moment, fear and anger collided inside me. I was terrified of what she might do next, but I was also beginning to see her clearly for the first time. And I knew then that things were only going to escalate from here. The battle for my dignity had just begun. I remember the day they told me we had a meeting to discuss my future. They said it was with a financial advisor, someone who could help make things easier for me. The way Melissa smiled when she said it made my skin crawl. But I went along, not wanting to cause a scene. I told myself maybe it really was about planning responsibly. But deep down, I knew better. The office was polished and cold, the kind of place that smelled faintly of leather and ink. Papers were already laid out on the desk, neat stacks waiting for my signature. The so-called advisor greeted me with a practiced warmth, the kind you find in salesmen who have already decided what you should buy. He talked about comfort, about safety, about protecting me from the burdens of responsibility. But every word felt like a slow tightening of chains. Melissa leaned in, her voice syrupy sweet, framing it all as if it were practical, inevitable. She said this was for my good, that I shouldn't have to worry about complicated matters anymore. My son sat silently beside her, nodding, avoiding my eyes. That silence cut deeper than her words. It was as though he had already surrendered me to her plan. As I stared at the papers, the words blurred. Power of attorney, transfer of rights. I felt my chest tighten, my hands trembling on my lap. A wave of doubt washed over me. Maybe I was too old to manage everything. Maybe I was being unreasonable. For a moment, I could almost believe them. Almost. But then, in the middle of that storm, I heard Harold's voice in my memory. He used to warn me about people who smile while stealing. He'd say, "It's not the loud ones you watch out for. It's the quiet ones who slip things from your hand while telling you it's for your own good." Sitting there, surrounded by their polished smiles, I realized exactly what he meant. I forced myself to nod, pretending to understand, pretending to consider what they wanted. Inside, though, I was steadying myself, planting my feet firmly in the soil of my own dignity. They wanted me to believe I was powerless. They wanted me to hand over the last pieces of myself. But I knew then, in that sterile office, that I wasn't going to sign. Not now, not ever. When the meeting ended, I left with my heart pounding, my body weak, but my resolve stronger than it had been in years. They thought they had broken me. What they didn't know was that they had awakened something I had buried, a quiet determination not to be erased. I walked out into the cool air, the weight of betrayal heavy on my shoulders, but also a spark of defiance burning inside me. That day was my breaking point, and it was also the moment I chose not to break. After that so-called meeting, I came home shaken, but not defeated. I sat in Harold's old armchair, the same one where he used to read the newspaper every evening, and I whispered to myself that I would not let them take everything. For years, I had tried to keep the peace, tried to convince myself it was better to bend than to break. But that day, I realized that bending any further would mean disappearing altogether. The next morning, I found myself standing in front of Harold's desk. It had been years since I'd opened those drawers. Most days, I only dusted the top and walked past it, afraid of the memories it carried. But that morning, I felt something calling me. With trembling hands, I pulled the drawers open, one by one. Bills, letters, photographs, and then beneath a stack of faded envelopes, a folder I had never noticed before. Inside, I found documents carefully labeled in Harold's neat handwriting. Property deeds, investment accounts, even a list of assets I never knew existed. My eyes blurred with tears as I read his notes, as if he had left them there for me to find at just the right moment. For the first time in weeks, I felt a rush of strength, a reminder that I wasn't as powerless as they wanted me to believe. One paper in particular caught my breath, a title to a piece of property I didn't even know we owned. My name was right there beside his. It was proof, black and white, that I still had ownership, that my signature mattered. In that moment, I realized Melissa couldn't erase me with a single form or a sweet smile. I still had ground to stand on. I made the decision that very day. I called an attorney, someone who was mine, not theirs. when I sat across from her and poured out everything that had happened. She listened without judgment. She told me to start keeping records. Every suspicious charge, every document they pushed in front of me, every word that felt like pressure or manipulation. For the first time, I felt like I had an ally. Then came the twist I never expected. As we gathered evidence, my attorney uncovered something chilling. Melissa had already tried to transfer one of my properties into her own name. The attempt had failed because of missing documentation, but the trail was clear. It wasn't just greed anymore, it was fraud, deliberate and calculated. When I held that evidence in my hands, I felt a strange mix of anger and relief. Anger at the depth of her betrayal, relief that she had been careless enough to leave proof. Instead of feeling defeated, I felt steadier than ever. They thought I would crumble under pressure. Instead, they had given me every reason to fight back. That night, I sat at Harold's desk again, the folder open in front of me. I whispered to him that I had found my strength, and I promised him I would see this through. Whatever came next, I was ready. The battle was no longer about fear, it was about reclaiming my dignity. And I would not let them win. When the day of the hearing arrived, I walked into that courtroom with my attorney by my side, my knees shaking, but my head held high. The room felt heavy, the air thick with whispers and the rustling of papers. Across the aisle, Melissa sat in her polished suit, her arms crossed, her smirk as sharp as ever. She radiated confidence, certain that she had already won. My son sat next to her, his gaze carefully avoiding mine. For a brief moment, I felt that old familiar ache, the pain of being treated as if I no longer mattered. But this time, I pushed it down and steadied myself. The judge entered, and the trial began. Melissa's lawyer painted me as a confused old woman clinging to property I didn't need, a burden standing in the way of her son's future. I listened quietly, my hands folded in my lap, refusing to let their words rattle me. I had lived too long, worked too hard, to be erased by lies. Then my attorney rose. Her voice was steady, deliberate, every word like a stone carefully placed. She presented the bank records, showing charges that Melissa had racked up under my name. She laid out evidence of fraudulent property transfers, signed with handwriting that was clearly not mine. She even played recordings of Melissa belittling me, clips that neighbors had helped collect. Each piece chipped away at the polished mask Melissa wore. I watched her confidence falter as the truth spread across the courtroom, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. But the moment that took my breath away came when the judge leaned forward, studying me more closely. His eyes softened, and he said he remembered me from decades ago, when he had been a young clerk fumbling through his first year in the courthouse. He recalled how I had stayed late one evening, helping him sort through files, offering kind words when he doubted himself. I had long forgotten that moment, but to him, it had mattered. He said it reminded him that dignity and kindness should never be dismissed. That recognition pierced through the years of hurt. In that instant, I felt seen not as a burden, not as someone to be brushed aside, but as the woman I had always been. The ruling came swiftly after that. The judge declared the evidence undeniable. Melissa was stripped of any claim to my property, barred from accessing my accounts, and ordered to pay restitution. My son sat pale and silent, as if the ground had shifted beneath him. Melissa's smirk had vanished, replaced by disbelief and fury. As the gavel struck, I felt the weight I had carried for so long lift from my shoulders. Justice, long delayed, had finally arrived. I walked out of that courtroom not as a victim, but as a woman who had stood her ground. And though scars remained, I knew this was the beginning of something new. What I didn't realize then was that the real work, the rebuilding of my life, my dignity, and my family was only just beginning. Looking back now, I realize the courtroom was not the end of my battle, but the beginning of healing. Winning justice gave me back more than property or security. It gave me back my dignity. For so long, I let myself believe I was invisible, that my years of sacrifice had been forgotten. But I learned that dignity is not something others grant us. It is something we must protect, even when it feels like the world wants to strip it away. Life feels different now. Lighter. I spend more time with my grandson, watching him laugh and run through the yard the way his father once did. Slowly, cautiously, I am finding ways to speak with my son again. The trust will take time, but I remind myself that rebuilding is a process, not a single moment. Each small step matters. What I know for certain is this resilience is born from pain, and respect must be earned on both sides. No one has the right to erase us. If my story touched something in you, I invite you to share it. Leave a comment, tell me where you're watching from, and pass this message on. Together, we can remind the world dignity never expires.